They say first impressions matter in life. Unfortunately, Mordhau decided that it wanted to wait at least 30 minutes to give me its first impression. Let's talk about how my first hour with Mordhau went. What exactly is Mordhau, besides just being a free game on Epic this week? Well, the description reads, Mordhau is a multiplayer medieval slasher. Create your mercenary and fight in brutal battles where you will experience fast-paced combat, castle sieges, cavalry charges, and more. Basically, Mordhau is a medieval version of Battlefield, with all the things that you would expect a Battlefield game to have if it was set in the Middle Ages. Horse combat, siege combat, even some light base building, in addition to the ranged combat and melee combat that you would expect from any large Battlefield type game. That first impression that Mordhau gave, what exactly was it like? Well, when I started up the game, first thing I did, check the computer settings. Everything was set as high as my graphics card would allow. And then I figured, why waste time? I've only got an hour, right? Let's jump right in. So I went to try to jump into a multiplayer battle. Clicked fight, and then waited a little bit longer before I realized this is taking a little while. Maybe it's because I hadn't selected all of the options that you can choose for types of quick engagements that you can get into. So I checked the other ones, and then I searched again, and I waited and I waited and I waited. This went on for about 10 minutes until I got an error message that said I'd been kicked from the server that I had never actually joined. Not a great start. 10 minutes into my journey, I had decided, let's go ahead and stop trying to get into battle with other players, and let's just do the tutorial, right? Might as well make the most of this time. Maybe the servers are having issues or something like that. Let's learn how to play the game. So I jumped into the tutorial. Initially, I tried to play with a controller because I wanted to see if this was going to be a game that maybe I could use to fill in some gaps when playing on the G Cloud. Found out very quickly that the controller felt incredibly both sluggish and oversensitive. Jumped into the settings, tried to mess with the dead zones a little bit, tried to mess with the sensitivity, but just couldn't find something that didn't feel like driving a car through molasses. So ended up switching to mouse and keyboard, and then switching from third person to first person. At this point, the lead character in the game proceeded to show me the different combat techniques. He sounded eerily similar to the Critical Drinker from YouTube.
Right down to it. Hit that dummy 3 times.
I've got a feeling it's going to be a fun experience for all of us.
But showed me the basics, right? Sword combat, slashing, stabbing, top-down combat, which the way they described it was incredibly hard to pull off until I figured you could just use the mouse wheel to do so. It'd be nicer if they had just explained that up front. But then went on to just bow and arrow, where I shot a man named Hans, who's apparently been shot before and is immune to arrows.
Hans! Splendid shot. Don't worry, Hans will be just fine.
Jumped onto a horse, did some jousting type combat with a lance, so that was kind of neat. Moved on to some of the siege combat mechanics, breaking down doors, fixing doors, launching a catapult. All fun things that would have been fun had it gone through them faster. Instead, it made you do everything 3 times, trying things multiple times until you did it and you're not sure how you did it. But either way, I finished it. They told me to take about 15 minutes. Probably took me 18 because I was messing with settings and stuff. And then we finally got into combat. Finally, the 30 minutes in where I could actually get a feel for what this game was like. I tried getting into a match again. Same settings as before, leaving everything open. And much to my surprise, this time I was able to get into a match. So I get in there and I check it out, immediately figure out that I had no idea what kind of match I was doing. I was intrigued by the thought of 48 or 64 person battles. What it put me into was almost a kind of gun game from Call of Duty, where you started with a weapon, would get into combat with any player you saw. There was no teams at all. And then if you killed that person, you would get their weapon, which actually surprised me a lot the first time because I didn't realize what I was getting into. Then you would continue to do that for 10-ish minutes or so. Every time that the match ended, people could vote on a new match, very similar to old school Counter-Strike, if you remember that. But everybody kept selecting the exact same type of game again, no matter if we chose Team Deathmatch or not. So for that half an hour that I actually got to play Mordhau, I just played the same thing over and over again, which got kind of boring. But let's get into how the game is. My favorite thing to talk about any game is usually the graphics. I love some good eye candy. Are the graphics, do they make up for all the issues that I noticed with the rest of the game so far? Well, the graphics in Mordhau are middling at best. There are some really good things. Some of the environmental textures look really great. Tessellated and looking really good there. But some of the character models, the armor models are pretty good with some good reflections and some good lighting coming off of them. But some of the characters look so flat and dull that it looks like a game that came from 2008. It's really a mixed bag when it comes to graphics. At best, it's not going to wow you, but it's passable. Sound in Mordhau was a solid 5. Swords sounded like swords. The horse sounded like a horse. It was kind of cool to hear footsteps all around you to know if somebody was coming up close, but it didn't really give me that kind of spatial sound that I would hope for to know exactly where it was coming from. There was no wow moments with sound. It was just passable, right? Like kind of the rest of this game up to this point, just passable. So, Mordhau, I spent an hour with it. 60 minutes. How do I look at this game at the end of it? Well, I look for the good and unfortunately the bad and everything. So, good things with Mordhau, there was 3 things that I really look at. 1, the tutorial, while long and drawn out, did cover everything that I needed to know about the game. I had a much better footing going in than I probably would have had I skipped it altogether. Along with that, there are a decent amount of graphics options, and some of it looks good. Like I said, some of the armors look good, some of the environments look good. The lighting was kind of flat, and the actual characters, the skin on them, that kind of stuff was really flat as well. And there was a wide variety of weapons, from a regular broadsword to a morning star to a pitchfork. Lots of different options for combat. The cons, number 1 has to be the matchmaking issues that I dealt with. Maybe that's not common. Maybe the game works normally. Maybe it was just because it's the free game on Epic and there's a lot of people playing, but trying to get into a game for 10 minutes, not a good start for how things went. The tutorial, like I said, while functional and taught me things, was incredibly boring. Trying to do some of the moves over and over and over again was not a fun time, and the whole time was just wishing it was over. And lastly, just the controls, like I mentioned before, they're unintuitive. They weren't how I would have wanted them to act. I don't know how I would have wanted them to act, but I know it wasn't like that. So at the end of the day, is this staying installed or is this getting uninstalled? Well, unfortunately, this one doesn't get to stay on my computer. Uninstalled it is.